So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. He's a renowned applied mathematics expert. He was a member of the MIT blackjack team, where his story took him to Las Vegas and inspired the best-selling book, Bringing Down the House, and the hit movie 21. Today, he shows companies how to harness the power of numbers to make better decisions, and that often are the difference between winning and losing. Our guest story, from the blackjack tables to corporate business, is told in his first book, The House Advantage, Playing the Odds to Win Big in Business, which you now have a copy of on your table. Please join me in welcoming Jeff Ma.
I don't know if I've ever really been called an applied mathematician before, so this is a first. Smooth transition. All right, here we go. So how many of you guys have seen 21 or read the book Bring Down the House? So you'll know what I like to call Hollywood magic, and I mean true Hollywood magic, is how you turn an average-looking Asian American male into a dashing British white guy. Because that's what they did. The movie 21 and the book Bring Down the House were based on me. It all started in 2001. A guy by the name of Ben Mesrick was a friend of mine, and he was an author, but he'd written 6 books, but it's fair to say that his career was pretty much in the shitter at that point, and he was deciding whether to be a writer anymore. And I approached him and I said, Ben, I have a good idea for your next book. And he said, well, what is it? And I said, me and my buddies from IT, we go to Vegas, we use math to beat the casinos and win lots of money. And he said, you know what? I don't think anyone wants to read a book about a bunch of MIT nerds. And so about a month later, I took him with me to Vegas. We got to Vegas, and he saw what we did, and he goes, oh, my God, this is the coolest thing ever. We should write a book about this. And I said, oh, great idea, Ben. So we went to his publisher, and we put a proposal together for a book called Bring Down the House, and the publisher liked it, but she said, I don't think this is really a book, because I don't think anyone wants to read a book about a bunch of MIT nerds. So we ignored her and wrote the book Bring Down the House, and it was a New York Times bestseller for over a year. And then a guy by the name of Kevin Spacey liked the book so much that he decided to turn it into a movie called 21. And 21 was #1 in the box office 2 weeks in a row and made $150 million off a $35 million budget. So I guess in the end, people did want to read a book and see a movie about a bunch of MIT nerds. So we won. What was cool is that Ben went on to write a book called The Accidental Billionaires, which got turned into a movie called The Social Network. And it's fair to say that I made Ben Mesrick what he is today. He doesn't always agree with me, but I don't care. So I like to always start by telling a couple stories that weren't in the book and weren't in the movie. And the first one actually comes, you guys as energy in this world, you have your emerging markets, and depending on whatever that is, it might be a new region, a new area, a new industry. For us, as card counters, our emerging markets were the opening of any casino. Because it was, when they open a new casino, they're not worried about card counters, they're worried about making sure their business just operates properly. So there's always 3 types of people at the opening of every casino. There's card counters, like myself. There's celebrities, like you see on the screen. Can anyone guess the 3rd type of person? You can tell a lot about a crowd by how quickly they get this answer. First of all, it's early, so I'm sure you guys are all still kind of in morning mode, but I was at a real estate conference in Orange County, and no sooner had the words come out of my mouth than a woman from the back row screams, hookers! So it's card counters, celebrities, and prostitutes, often at the opening of every casino. And I had the pleasure of playing blackjack that day. So the Bellagio opened. The Bellagio Casino opened about, 12 years ago or 13 years ago. And I had the pleasure of playing blackjack that night with Kevin Costner. And Kevin was there with all of his friends, and Kevin was a decent blackjack player, meaning he did the right thing most of the time. But then he started to lose, and he lost about 8 or 9 hands in a row. And every hand he lost, his friends would look at me and say, God, this is like Waterworld all over again. Okay. So I like to always talk about what my defining moment was, my most important lesson, and if you guys want a really good laugh, it's me when I trip over that cord walking around here, because that'll be good. But we talk about what's the most important lesson that I ever learned. And I was 21 years old. I was a part of the MIT blackjack team, and I had just learned this system where you use math to beat the casinos. And every decision that you make in the casino is objective. It's based on data. It's based on fact. It's not based on opinion. And this data and this fact and this math called for me to bet 2 hands of $10,000 at the Caesar's Palace that day. And I did. And on the first hand, I got an 11. On the second hand, I got a pair of 9s. And the dealer had a 6 up. So how many of you guys play blackjack here? About half of you. Pair 11 against a 6, what do? I got to double down, which means I put another $10,000 down. I only get one more card, but I'm getting to double my bet because I have an 11 and the dealer has a 6. That's a very favorable situation. So I put another $10,000 down. I get an 8 on that to make 19. The pair of 9s, what do? I want to split those, which means I put another $10,000 down, and I get to play each 9 separately. So I put $10,000 down on the first 9, I get a 2 to make 11. What do? Double down again. Put another $10,000 down, I get a 9 on that to make 20. And on the last 9, I get a 10 to make 19. So I have 19, 20, and 19 against the dealer's 6. The dealer flips a 5 to make 11, and he gets a 10 to make 21. I lose $50,000. This woman behind me shrieks, "Oh my God, that's my entire mortgage!" And I want to turn around and go, "Where the hell do you live?" Because I live in San Francisco, and that's a cardboard box in the Tenderloin. You can probably get houses here for $50,000, can't you? No? Yeah? Not really, no. Just, San Francisco is ridiculous now, the real estate there. But anyway, so this woman behind me is shrieking about her house and her mortgage, and I'm wondering where she lives. And anyways, the way that you have to make decisions in blackjack is it's 100% objective, right? It's not subjective at all. And you can't be influenced by emotion, okay? You've got to be focused on data and focused on objective measures. So I can't be influenced by the emotion of that last hand, and now the math calls for me to bet 3 hands of $10,000. So I do. In the first one, I get a 9. On the second one, I get a 19. And on the last one, I get an ace-4 against the dealer's 5. Now, what's interesting is 9 against 5 is actually another double-down hand. So I put another $10,000 down. I get a 10 on that to make 19. 19, I stand. Ace-4 against a 5 is another double-down hand. All right, so I double that down, and I get a 4 on that to make 19. So now I have 19, 19, 19 against the dealer's 5. Here's my chance to win back everything I just lost, or to lose, I guess, another one of those women's houses. So this is one of those moments in time when you wonder, how did I get here? I graduated from MIT in 1994 with a mechanical engineering major that I've used none of in my life. I went to work as an options trader for a while, and then this whole internet thing happened, and I went back and I started a bunch of different businesses that all of which were sold to different companies. Most recently, I started a company called Citizen Sports, which we sold to Yahoo 2 years ago, and then I recently, about a year ago, started a company called tenXer, T-E-N-X-E-R. But during this whole time, from 1994 to 2001, I was a professional blackjack player. And since I mentioned the internet, I always like to pay homage to the guy who invented the internet. And my favorite thing now to say is that Al Gore has invented 2 things for us, right? He's invented the internet, which is good, right? Certainly we wouldn't be where we are without it. But then he invented global warming, which has been bad for us. So that's a joke. It's a joke. It's a good one for this crowd. I would assume that people enjoy that in this crowd. Often, like you can tell a lot about like the political climate of the crowd when I tell that joke. I was doing the National Pest Association conference in Las Vegas, and I told that joke and got a standing O. So, okay, so as a professional blackjack player, what does that mean? Well, there's always 3 things that people say. The first is they say, "Isn't that illegal?" And it's actually been tried up to the highest level of Supreme Court, and it's 100% legal. Okay, it's like if you and I play Monopoly together, right? And I win all the time because I buy Boardwalk and Park Place, and you always buy the crappy purple properties. And one day you throw the board up in the air and you say, this should be illegal. Well, that's essentially what the casinos are doing. We're better than they are at blackjack. We're not using any computers. We're not cheating. We're just better than they are. But yet they have the right to refuse service to anyone they want. They can't arrest us, but they can tell us not to play blackjack. The second thing that people say is, are you banned from Vegas? And believe it or not, there's not someone that waits for me at the jetway in McCarran Airport when I land and they say, excuse me, Mr. Ma, you've got to turn around and go home. All right, I'm just not allowed to play blackjack there. So funny story, for those of you guys that have seen the movie, you know that I'm in the movie, right? I'm in the movie, right? This is always like the most disappointing 2 to 3 minutes of my life. I play a dealer named Jeffrey. The guy that plays me walks up to me, says, Jeffrey, my brother from another mother. We have this witty back and forth, still not ringing any bells, is it? All right, so if you want to go back and watch it, it's at about 59 minutes and 3 seconds. So anyways, this scene that I filmed out there, which I have a SAG card for, and anyways, I had 3 days of filming is what it took, because the movie-making business is incredibly inefficient. The second day I'm out there, the cast of the movie, so Kevin Spacey, Lawrence Fishburne, Kate Bosworth, they come up to me and they say, hey, Jeff, can we all go to dinner tonight? We'd love to take you out to dinner or treat you to dinner as a thank you for letting us tell your story on the big screen. And I said, okay, that sounds like fun. And on the way over to dinner, Kate Bosworth pulls me aside, and she says, hey, Jeff, can I talk to you? Of course, I'm single at that point. Kate Bosworth pulled me aside. She's like, Jeff, I've got a great idea for what you and I can do after dinner. And I'm like, huh, this is going well. And I go, okay, Kate, tell me what it is. And she says, well, I think it'd be really fun if we all go play blackjack together. You can coach us and tell us what to do. And I was like, whoever said that, yeah. First off, that wasn't what I was hoping for. Second of all, I think that's a terrible idea, Kate. She said, why? And I said, because we're going to the Palms. They know me very well there. There's no way they're going to let me play blackjack. And she said, it's okay. You'll be with me. I'm a big star. They won't bother you. And I said, Kate, it's been a long time since Blue Crush. I don't know what a big star you are anymore. And what seemed like a bad idea after about 6, 7 bottles of wine seemed like this great idea. We roll upstairs to the Playboy Club at the Palms Casino and sit down to start playing blackjack. And the floor person looks at me and he says, Jeff, what are you doing? And I said, I'm here to play blackjack with Kate Bosworth, big star, Blue Crush, no big deal, right? And he said, let me check. So he calls upstairs and he comes back and he says, Jeff, not only are you not allowed to play blackjack, but if your little friend Kate is at the table, you're not allowed to be within 20 feet of the table. And that was cool because it gave me a lot of street cred with Kate because she thought I was dangerous then. And she went back and told everyone how dangerous I was. It didn't get me anywhere with her, but at least I seemed cool to her in her eyes. So not banned from Vegas, just not allowed to play blackjack. And then finally, people always say, remind me never to play poker with you. And what's interesting about this is that it highlights why blackjack is this incredible game to sort of learn this framework for making better decisions. Because poker is a game that you can do everything right? You can make all the right decisions, and then some dude decides to go all in on 2-7, and you're screwed when the 2-7 pops up, right? But blackjack is a game with a very closed system. You know at all time what the dealer is going to do. You know at all time so that the people at the table don't matter to you. You know what cards are remaining. It's very perfect in terms of understanding how to make really good, rational decisions based on data. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to teach you a little bit about how to beat blackjack. Okay, the first thing to do is learn and follow basic strategy. Now this chart that you see up here is what to do at every hand at the blackjack table, and it's available. It's at the back of the book that you guys have all sitting here. I usually make a joke about how my book's available on Amazon a bunch of times throughout the thing so that hopefully people are ordering it while I'm talking. But now that you have it sitting on your table, I don't have to shill, so it's fine. Anyways, but this chart is at the back of the book, and it's what to do at every hand at the blackjack table. And it's been simulated. It says, like, hey, if I have the player has this hand and the dealer has this hand, it's the right thing to do. And it's always the right decision. Okay, but what's interesting about this concept of basic strategy is, one, the average blackjack player loses 5% of the money they put, sorry, loses 3% of the money they put on the table. So following basic strategy perfectly reduces the casino's edge by 6 times, meaning instead of losing 3% of the money you put on the table, you now only lose 0.5% of the money you put on the table. So that's a great advantage. But most people don't follow basic strategy. In fact, a lot of people don't want to, even when they know the right thing. And there was a professor at UCLA named Bruce Carlin who did studies on blackjack where he found that 4 times the mistakes that are made by omission or inactivity, favoring inactivity over activity, being too passive, right? Because the classic example is you have 15 and the dealer has a 9, right? And you decide, hey, I'm not going to hit this because if I get a 7, an 8, a 9, a 10, a jack, a queen, a king, I'm going to lose right away. I'd rather sit back and hope that the dealer errors, right? And this is this concept of deciding to like maintain status quo versus making a decision, avoiding making a decision, omission bias. It actually, I like learned recently, if any of you guys ever watched that show Dexter, I learned recently that this omission bias concept comes from the Bible, which is interesting because it's the sins of omission versus non. Anyways, I don't know if anyone cares, but I thought that was very interesting. The interesting thing about this is that when I wrote this book, The House Advantage, one of the reasons I wrote it was because I wanted to write a mainstream book on data and analytics that anyone would read. And so I used sports and gambling analogies to sort of make it work. Now, when I wrote the book, I went out and did a bunch of PR for the book, and most of it was business PR, and I wanted to do some mainstream PR because I wanted to reach the everyday person. And so Good Morning America and I were discussing doing a feature, and the producer at Good Morning America called me, and she said, Jeff, I love your book, and I love the concept. The problem is we're not a business show. So you have to give me an example of how this type of stuff can help you make everyday decisions. And I said, God, I don't really have a great example of that. But that all changed 2 years ago. And actually what's interesting is I was talking to someone here today who saw me speak at this conference. I was speaking at a conference in Lake Tahoe for Miller Hyman, the sales organization. And right before I went on stage at that concert, at that speech, I got a phone call from my sister. And my sister said, hey, I have some bad news. And I said, what? And she said, Mom had a stroke. And I said, huh, yeah, is it bad? And she said, well, yeah, I think it's pretty bad. So I went and did the speech. It was probably the hardest speech I've ever done. And then went and called my dad to find out how bad it was. And he said, hey, it's really bad. And I was actually about to go on a 10-city speaking tour of Asia. So when I talked to my dad, I said, okay, I'm going to come home. My parents live in Boston. I live in San Francisco. And I decided I canceled the first couple legs of my Asia tour. And I went back to Boston. And I went home and saw my parents. And my mom's stroke was really bad. When I walked in, she couldn't recognize me. She couldn't move the entire right side of her body, and she couldn't speak at all. And I sat down with my sisters and my dad and the neurosurgeon. The neurosurgeon said, hey, Jeff, we want to tell you about your options. And we said, okay, what are our options? And they said, well, a woman and 75 years old, a stroke of this kind, normally what we want to do is sit back and do nothing. She just suffered a really bad trauma, and we don't want to make it worse, and we don't want to cause more complications. We're going to sit back and hope for the best. And I said, okay, well, what are her odds of surviving in a case like that? And he says, well, in a case of this type, we think she has a 22% chance to survive past 60 days. And I said, wow, I don't really like those odds. What are our other options? And he said, well, actually, your mom's in great shape. She was working out the morning that she had the stroke. She's, doesn't smoke, so we think maybe being a little bit more aggressive might be the way to go. And I said, okay, well, what does that mean? And he says, well, we'll drill a hole, and we'll suck the blood clot out, and we'll be aggressive, and we'll try to relieve the pressure right away. And I said, well, what are the chances there? And he said, well, we don't know the chances, but I can almost guarantee that it's a lot better than 22%. And even still, this is her best chance, I think, for her to lead a normal life. And as he was saying this to me, I had this moment of epiphany where I realized that this was so similar to this blackjack stuff. And I started going on about how this was just like hitting a 15 against a 9. If you think it's the right thing to do, even it might be aggressive and blah, 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 you got to do it and all this stuff. And my sisters and my dad looked at me like I was crazy. Like this blackjack stuff has clearly gone to his head. But after half an hour of kind of explaining to them what I meant, they agreed with me, and we decided to operate. We let the neurosurgeon go in and operate. He operated, and operation went really well. After a couple days more there, I decided to take off and go do the rest of my Asia tour because my mom was starting to perk up, and it seemed like she was on the recovery. And as I was leaving, this is about 9 months before I got married, as I was leaving, I turned to my mom and I said, Mom, I just want to make sure that you can dance with me at my wedding. And she said, oh, that'll be easy. And so I'm proud to say that 9 months after that, my mom danced with me at my wedding, and now she can speak and walk and work out and do pretty much everything. She has a little bit of aphasia, meaning she has trouble saying the right thing all the time, but I think we all have that problem. So. But I mean, I owe a lot of that concept of being able to make that difficult decision on this concept of blackjack. Some of the other things about basic strategy that are interesting are that simulations tell you the right answers. So there's no such thing as gut, right? You're relying on data to tell you what to do. But even though you always make the right decision, that doesn't necessarily mean you have the right outcome. And I love thinking about this in terms of business, right? Because when we evaluate the decisions we make in life, right, a lot of times we evaluate based only on the outcome when it could have been a great decision, and something bad, something unlucky happened, and you suffered a poor outcome. Again, the example of this is 15 against a 9. If I'm there and I'm drinking my beer, standing behind Kate Bosworth while she plays blackjack, and she turns around and she says, Jeff, I have 15, dealer has a 9, what should I do? And I said, you should hit, absolutely. If she gets 6 to make 21 and wins, I'm a genius. If she gets 7 to make 22 and loses, I'm an idiot that they never should have made a movie or a book about. Right? But in both cases, the decision was the right decision. In one case, you had a poor outcome. In that case, you didn't. And you see this all the time in sports, right? Like all the time, they'll be like, oh, it's a great decision, but no, it didn't work. Well, that doesn't always mean it wasn't the right decision. So basic strategy we covered. Now the next thing, as I told you, basic strategy just takes your odds of winning from -3% to -0.5%. But you're not in the positive yet. So card counting is the way that you become in the positive. So what is card counting? Well, to understand what card counting is, let's contrast it to some other casino games. Okay, everyone's familiar with roulette, right? This magical, I'll tell you the roulette story. So after I stopped playing blackjack, professionally, some of my friends, this is before the movie stuff all came out, would come and ask me to go to Vegas with them. And I had a friend, Brian, who was a really, really, really big gambler, but wasn't so good at math. So he asked me to come take him to Vegas and help him win money. So we decided to go to Vegas, and we go to one casino and start playing. And I coached him for a couple hours, and after a couple hours, we won a couple $1,000s. And I grabbed him and I said, hey, let's get out of here and go spend this money. He goes, oh yeah, let's be fun. So we start leaving the table, and all of a sudden, as we're going to the cage, Brian disappears. And I'm looking around, and all of a sudden I hear, $1,000 on black. Brian's at the roulette wheel. I'm like, okay. So I walk up to the roulette wheel. As I'm walking up, I hear 14 red. Brian lost $1,000. I'm like, okay, whatever. I thought to myself, what a dipshit. And I grab him and I go, come on, Brian, let's get out of here. And he pulls back and he goes, another $1,000 on black. And I said, okay. Brian, what are you doing? He says, Jeff, don't you see what's happening here? And I said, what? And Brian points above the roulette wheel, and there's a magical sign which shows the results of the last 20 spins. The last now 7 have all been red. So in Brian's mind, black is due. But we all know that's not true, right? We all know that's not true. Every spin of that roulette wheel is independent, right? It doesn't matter how many blacks have come up or how many reds have come up. The odds of it coming up again are the same. A little less than 50-50 because there's greens on there. Anyways, so I turn to Brian, I go, that's not, she goes, shut up. I know you know math and all that probability crap, but this is roulette and this is gambling and I know gambling. I was like, all right. So I backed away. Another improbable 3 reds in a row. Brian was now down $2,000, but at least got to learn a valuable lesson in probability. So the second, you take a game like craps, and all of us do this if you've ever played craps. You walk up to the table and you say, hey, how's this shooter been? How's this table been? It's probably been about the same as every other shooter and every other table. They roll a lot of 7s and not many 11s. But we all look for these sort of patterns and these ideas. But if you contrast this to blackjack, if I take all 4 aces out of a deck of cards, hand you that deck of cards, what do you think the chance of you dealing yourself blackjack are? 0, right? There's no chance because there's no more aces left. So blackjack is the only game in the casino with a memory, hence the elephant, and the other games don't have a memory. This is the portion of when I see if people are paying attention, right? Fish, elephant, fish have no memory, elephants, yeah. Anyways, so what is card counting then? People think it's memorizing every card, you need to be an statistic savant to do it, blah, blah, blah. No, that's not true. Okay, there was a professor by the name of Ed Thorpe, and what he found is that when there's a lot of high cards left in the deck, so 10s, face cards, aces, it's in the player's favor. When there's a lot of low cards left in the deck, 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, and 6s, it's in the dealer's favor. 7s, 8s, and 9s are roughly neutral. So you just track the cards you've seen so you understand what cards are left or remaining, and you bet more when the odds are in your favor, and you bet less when the odds are not in your favor. Couldn't be any simpler, right? And so card counting actually raises your odds of winning from -0.5% to 2%. And an interesting sort of analogy here, and we talked a little bit about this concept, is then it comes down to money management, right? And this is this idea that in blackjack, with this 2% advantage, you try to really focus on the big picture, and it's like flipping a coin. You want to manage your money so that you get to flip the coin as many times as you want. So it's like you have to have a large amount of money, and you have a small advantage, and you just keep deploying that capital over and over again. Okay, so the last thing we're going to talk about in terms of blackjack is how to make difficult decisions. Okay, so there I am, Jeffrey the dealer, in case you guys didn't believe me. That was me. I have a little name tag that says Jeffrey that they spelled my name incorrectly on, which was a major, a major blow to the ego in my, when I realized where I fit in the whole hierarchy of acting. But actually, I have this picture up here to talk about one of the most difficult decisions that I ever made at the blackjack table. So those of you guys that play blackjack, have you ever split tens? Okay, I want you at my casino, whoever said yes, and who else ever said yes? That's, yeah. So there's no reason to ever split tens unless you're card counting, right? But let me put it to you this way. Imagine you have a pair of tens and the dealer has a 6-up. And I've told you that card counting is the knowledge of how many tens, face cards, and aces left. And in this situation where you have a pair of tens and the dealer has a 6-up, you know that to a card, all the cards that you haven't seen pretty much are tens, face cards, or aces. In that situation, do you think you should split tens? Yes, right? It's a higher expected value. It's a pretty good chance you're going to win. So there is something called advanced strategy where you modify basic strategy based on your knowledge of what cards are remaining. So it's a very difficult thing to do because you do some very unconventional things when you do it. Well, I had just learned this strategy, and I understood that there was a lot of value in employing it. And I walked up to the table at MGM Grand, and I bet 2 hands of $8,000. On the first hand, I got blackjack. On the second one, I got a pair of tens, and the dealer had a 6-up. So I did the math in my head. The dealer started to pay off my blackjack, paid me $12,000 for my blackjack, and then got to my pair of tens and started to pass my pair of tens. And I looked at the woman and I said, hold on a second. I might want to split these. And she said, you might want to what? I think I might want to split these. And as she's looking at me, I'm starting to feel very uncomfortable. And I do the math again in my head, and I go, okay, this is a hand I should split. The math isn't even close. But yet I don't want to split it. And I'm like feeling uncomfortable. I'm like, why do I not want to split these? And as I look at the cards and look at the people around me and look at the floor person and look at the group of people behind me, I realize that the reason that I don't want to split these tens is because I'm falling for something called groupthink, where I don't want to upset people. I want to make this decision based on sort of what everyone at the table wants me to do and what everyone behind me wants me to do. But the problem is they don't have the knowledge or the technology that I have, right? They don't know this innovation of numbers, and they don't know that there's only tens, face cards, and aces left. So I can't be influenced by them, right? And that's a lot of what we face in business is this concept of, hey, we know new things, we have new approaches, we have new data. we can't just fall for the old way of doing things because that's the way we think people will want us to do them. And we can't be afraid to sort of buck the trend and do something a little bit different if we know that that's the right decision, if we have data and we have information that other people don't have. So I can't fall for groupthink. The second thing that I realize, as I get over this groupthink concept, is I realize, like, I have 20 with $8,000 on the table. I don't want to lose that 20, right? I don't want to lose that $8,000. That's pretty much a winning hand. But that's the wrong way to think about it. In fact, at that point, I'm like worried about failure versus like optimizing for winning. And that's this concept called loss aversion. Whereas human beings, we're more impacted by a potential loss than we are by a potential gain of the same amount. We're afraid of losing. And oftentimes that happens when we have something to lose. Like, you think about small companies, right? When they're small, they can take lots of risks. They have nothing to lose. But as a company gets bigger and they have assets that they're worried about and a reputation and liability, they start to become more and more conservative. And I remember I was giving a speech at a company called Facebook. And at that time, Facebook had about 30 million users. And I went back and gave another speech at Facebook 13 months later, and they had 500 million users. And as I'm giving this talk and thinking about this, I'm like, look at you guys, right? You used to, like, I was here 13 months ago. You had 30 million users. Now that you have 500 million users, are you going to take similar risks to what you, and before the words were even out of my mouth, a man from the back row who was on their executive team at the time named Chamath screamed, "Hell yeah!" And that's one of the reasons Facebook has been successful, because they understand that they can't look at, like, preventing loss. I mean, they can't do that on their stock price, I'm sure, but in general, the story was always better before they went public. But the point is, they understand that it's not about maintaining what you have, it's about gaining more. And another great story about this is another company in the Valley that friends of mine, when I moved out to the Valley in the early 2000s or mid 2000s, there was another small company in the Valley called Apple that was doing poorly at that point. And my buddies and I, we all used Apple devices, and we said, this is kind of silly. We should buy some Apple stock, and it was at 60 at the time. And so we bought some stock at 60, and 11 months later, the stock was at 120. And my buddies were all like, hey, I think we're going to sell our Apple. And I said, well, why are you going to sell your Apple? And they said, well, we don't want to be greedy. We just doubled our money. When are you ever going to get a 100% ROI in 11 months? Don't be greedy. And I said, well, do you think Apple's a buy or a sell at 120? And they said, well, actually, the funny thing is we think it's a buy. Well, then why would you sell it? Because we don't want to be greedy. But that decision to sell or buy Apple should have nothing to do with whether you own it or not. It should just have to do with what you think is the right decision, where you can put other money, and what you think will yield you the most money. So how do you think those people feel now? All right, back to my story of at the blackjack table. So here I am, right, looking at the blackjack table, and these other people around me, can't fall for loss aversion. I have a great opportunity here. So I put another $8,000 down, split those tens. Dealer gives me an ace on the first one to make 21. It gives me a 9 on the second one to make 19. Dealer flips a 10 to make 16, and then gets another 10 to make 26 and loses. Pays me my $16,000. I grab my $12,000 from winning the blackjack and run away from the table with $28,000 because pretty much everyone at the table now wants to kill me. And it was a difficult decision, but I walked away with $28,000 versus $20,000, which is a pretty significant difference for a couple minutes of work. So the concept of making difficult decisions in this case, it was hard, but when you kind of divorce yourself, if you have this sort of plan and this way of looking at things and divorce yourself from cognitive biases, you can make difficult decisions. So let's talk quickly. How much time do we have? Anyone got a clock on this? What's that? 5 minutes? Okay. Well, I could go on forever. I mean, I love to talk. I love to hear myself talk. So, all right, well, let's skip over this and let's go to the grand finale then. So my key learnings from blackjack. 1, Realized decisions are everywhere. A decision to maintain status quo is still a decision. And as you think about that, right, think about the story of my mom that I mentioned, the idea that just because it's just because it's the passive way, like hey, I'll put off making this decision. Every day that you put off making a decision, it's a decision to not make a decision. Evaluate decisions from a true zero frame of reference. What will help you win the most? Don't think about what will prevent you from losing. Right? Think about what's the potential upside, and don't think about this concept that they call it endowment bias, which is like once you own something, you feel like there's more to lose. But that's not true. Imagine you're able to make a decision millions of times and focus on the big picture. And now, one of the things that I always tell that Apple story, and it got to the point where I literally would have to look at a paper the day before I would always tell that Apple story so I could say, now that Apple's at 360 or now that Apple's at 400, how do you think those guys feel? I never know, even though I own Apple stock, what Apple's stock price is. Because knowing day to day what the stocks do or what the market does, it'll only make you make bad decisions, right? You need to focus on the big picture. You need to, like when you put a position on, when you make a trade, whatever it is, you need to focus on that position and you need to stick with that, right? The day-to-day fluctuations, especially if something is as fickle as the market, will only make you make bad decisions. People always say, well, how should I invest my money? Well, you passively, right? Sit back, let people, take advantage of diversity. Don't be someone that has to sit there and try to predict things that, like the weather or predict like the winds or things like that. Leave that to the professionals. Don't do it as an individual. So imagine you're able to make a decision a million times and focus on the big picture. And then finally, don't confuse the outcome with the decision. A bad outcome does not always equal a bad decision, and a bad decision does not always equal a bad outcome. So focus on the process, not the results. And I think, to me, that's one of the most important things that I ever learned from the blackjack world. Okay, so with all those learnings in our basket, let's go to my big lesson. So I just lost $50,000, setting the stage for you. Have another $50,000 out on the table, and I have a woman behind me shrieking about her house. I have 19, 19, 19 against the dealer's 5, and the only reason that I'm in this situation to win this back is because I believe in those key learnings, and I believe in the power of data to make decisions and objective decision making and sticking with your gut, sticking with your plan. And so the dealer flips a jack to make 15, and then gets a 6 to make 21. So I lose another $50,000. And I remember just being crushed, right? I'm 21 years old, just lost $100,000 in the better part of 3 minutes. Walk up to my room at Caesar's Palace, collapse on the floor, and start to think. I stare up at the ceiling. I wonder to myself, why is there a mirror up there? Once I get over that. I'm 21 years old. I have no idea why there's a mirror up there. I'm like, what, do people lie in their bed and get ready? That seems like a weird thing to do. So once I got over the mirror thing, I started thinking about the decision I'd made, and I thought about like what decision I was going to make going forward. And my decision ultimately was, do I keep playing? What do I keep doing that weekend? And a part of me was like, I'll just stop playing for the weekend, and the next trip I'll play again. But that would be like omission bias. I'm essentially making a decision not to play. I can't fall for that. I started thinking about, like, God, I just lost $100,000. If I don't play anymore, I won't lose any more money. At least we still have some money left. But of course, that would be loss aversion. I wouldn't be optimizing. I'd be preventing loss. And then I think about the big picture. The big picture was, in the time that I played blackjack up till then, I was positive. I was still positive, even with that $100,000 loss. So I got to focus on the big picture and not on one individual event. And then finally, I thought, like, had I made the right decision and just suffered a poor outcome, or had I made the wrong decision? And I felt very confident that I'd made the right decision and just suffered an unlucky poor outcome. I mean, you saw there was only 1 or 2 cards that they could have gotten that would have beaten me. So I went back down and I kept playing. And over the next day and a half, I won back $100,000. And the last day I was there, I won an additional $70,000. So I ended up $70,000 for the weekend. And it's interesting because I tell this story a lot. And I told this story at a venture event. There's a venture capital, a very successful venture capital guy by the name of Vinod Khosla in the Valley. And he was with Kleiner Perkins, and he does a lot of alternative energy stuff and things like that. And I was speaking at his event. And what was interesting was the speaker before me was a guy by the name of Bill Gates. So it was a very intimidating thing to follow up on. And Vinod and I didn't really even know each other at the time. One of his partners actually was a friend of mine and brought me on to speak. And so I'm there at this speech, and I'm looking out at Vinod, and I want to impress Vinod. And Vinod's pretty much on his BlackBerry the entire speech. And so I'm like, oh, this is great. He's not even paying attention. And so I get to this part of the story, and I'm starting to tell my story. And all of a sudden, Vinod stands up and raises his hand. I'm like, I don't know we're taking questions yet, but okay, I guess since this is your conference, you can ask a question. And he says, I don't believe you. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, I don't believe that you ever doubted your system. And I was like, okay. And he said, I just can't believe that you would do that. And I'm like, what do you mean? And then I started thinking about what he meant, and he was right. I mean, at the core, if you believe in a system, if you really believe in it, you know it works, you can't let one event sway you. And he was right. I believed in that system, and I knew mathematically it worked, and I never had that much doubt. But those types of things, I mean, they're hard. And there's times when things will go against you. And I'm an entrepreneur, and I speak a lot to entrepreneurs about how tough it is to be an entrepreneur and how tough it is to make difficult decisions. And the only way to really do it and be successful is when you believe in something is to stick with it. When you have a plan, you stick with it. Okay, so if I give you one thing to take away from here, it's that idea is have a plan, stick with it, even when you lose $100,000 in 2 hands of blackjack. So thanks for the time, guys.